And that's quite a profound shift. Let's call that the shift from achiever to regenerator, or from coping and struggling amid complexity, because you're worried about change, you're worried about insecurity, your separate self struggling to survive in a dangerous world, to actually going across a threshold and realizing you are immersed in, you are self as participatory, and that you have the capacity to open up to infinite potential as and when you wish, and that change and uncertainty is the vibrancy to life.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex and this is Voices of Emergence. We're here to host a living conversation with our guests, and we believe real change starts by truly listening to what wants to emerge. We're here to seek what's authentic in a world that's unraveling and reimagining itself at the same time. So, how do we meet these complex times? We'll explore new ideas with integrity, with presence, purpose, and soul. A little bit about me. I'm a bridge builder at heart. I grew up between many cultures. I've walked in different worlds, from corporate boardrooms to ritual spaces, from the intellectual to the deeply intuitive. My passion is weaving insights into stories and those stories into genuine connections. This podcast is my way of bringing these threads together with curiosity, and I'm definitely not alone on this journey. I'm incredibly excited to be joined by my dear friend and co-host, Rudy the Wala. What I most admire about Rudy, that he doesn't just talk about wisdom, he truly lives it. He holds space with the kind of open heart that comes from walking through challenges and still choosing softness. He has a gift for bringing people together in those quiet, often unseen spaces where real change begins. And I'm deeply touched by the collaboration we're building together. So thank you for being here with us. If this space resonates with you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's ready to walk a deeper path. We've got some powerful conversations ahead. And with that, I'll hand it over to Rudy to welcome today's guest.
Thank you, Alex, for this wonderful introduction. And we are pleased to welcome our first guest, Giles Hutchins. Giles applies 25 years of business experience to his organizational development, executive coaching, leadership immersion workshops, speaking, writing, and catalytic skills to the transformation and emergence of a new logic in business and beyond. The organization as a living system, resilient, vibrant, purposeful business that seek life-affirming futures. Giles is also a chairman of the Future Fit Leadership Academy. He's a founder of Leadership Immersions, a lead partner of the Natural Business Partnership, co-founder of BCI Biomimicry for Creative Innovation, co-founder of Regenerators together with Laura Storm, and advisor to several forward-leaning organizations. He also works with leading business schools on groundbreaking leadership and organizational development. But Giles is above all this also a writer of some very good and classic books already in regeneration. Regenerative Leadership, together with Laura Storm, he wrote The Nature of Business and then Leading by Nature. And then his latest book, In Keys for Future Fit Leadership, he melds pioneering neuroscience, adult developmental psychology, and cutting-edge findings on consciousness with ancient wisdom and insights from nature to forge the keys humanity needs for future fit leadership. We will go to that future fit leadership later in this episode. Welcome and good afternoon.
It's good to be with you both. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so I remember the first time I saw your name or I got to know your ideas and vision was in the book of Regenerative Leadership, which I think I read around 2019 or 2020. And actually, I was already experiencing regenerative communities and agricultural projects that I was with in Turkey and then later in Ibiza. But when reading the book, I realized, wow, this goes much beyond just an idea of what we knew at that time, perhaps just in agriculture or communities. This is really an idea and a vision that can also transform business. So Giles, what I wanted to know, like, actually, how did you get to that point? Because you also have a background in management consulting. You worked at KPMG, and you have lots of experience in there. And then how did you come to that period of like moving to regeneration? It's a massive turn. I experienced it myself. It takes a couple of years. It's a real deep process. But I want to know, like, what are the key moments that were for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I did, when I was quite young, I had some out of body experiences, a couple of smaller ones when I was a child. The main one that I remember that was quite informative was around the age of about 7. So for about an hour or so, I was completely immersed in what I now know as the kind of field, or what I call nature's wisdom. Back then, I just didn't have words for it, but it was a wonderful, eye-opening experience. And it made me then realize that what I was seeing on nature programs and what I was sort of being educated in and was understanding and asking questions about was really only half of what was really going on, or even not even half. Animals find their way home through instinct, or a salmon finds its way upstream just because of instinct, and the instinct was just some inherent thing, and that everything was blind chance, and evolution just kind of happened through random mutations. Wasn't at all how it was. So I suppose that happened early on, but it wasn't until I was about 15 years old, and I remember the moment as clear as today as any day, where actually a maths teacher, unbeknown to us, actually showed us a video of animals being tested on live in laboratories, but also being skinned alive in factory farms. And it was utterly, it shifted me. And what was interesting that day was not only the effect it had on me, me realizing that the wheels of this so-called civilization I was being groomed and educated in were just falling off completely. And then I started asking questions. You go down a rabbit hole, you find out about everything else that's going on in the world. And that was the sort of mid-80s. So sustainability wasn't really around then. But I started realizing major problems like deforestation, child labor, and so forth, and started asking questions about, well, hang on a minute. Do other people know about this? Why are we going along with this? Why are my parents? Why are my teachers? Why are my, other people's parents? So it was also interesting to see how other children in the classroom were all shocked, but within 3 or 4 hours had pretty much all moved on. By the following weekend, I think it was just me and one other person. A week later, it was just me. So it made me realize that also how easy we are to just put up with things that we know are inherently wrong. But that was quite an interesting insight for me. It sent me down a path of sort of activism. Yeah, but I actually sort of resurfaced from that around 18, 19, when I made a vow, commitment to myself to go into business, because everybody seemed to be saying it was the reasons why these things happen is because of business, and you just don't understand the business mind, or these are fanciful ideas, but that's not how society works. And so I vowed to go into business and use my intelligence and intellect to go in there and find out what on earth is going on. And then much later, in 2005-06, I watched a David Attenborough program that awakened me to the time being now for me to get, that I'd watched and understood enough about the business system through senior roles in companies like KPMG and multinationals and so forth, that actually the time was now for me to activate and start making good. And that led to things like biomimicry for creative innovation, which then led on to things like regenerative leadership, which just weren't terms back then. For me, this innate love of life that I've always felt was an important, inherent key aspect of us finding our way home, building futures, organizations, value creating opportunities in ways that actually work with life rather than against it.
Giles, that's fascinating. And it sounds like quite early you lifted the veils of this conditioning and programming, but you saw that a lot of people they remain in it. They see something shocking, but then they start to accept it and live with it. So how would you define regeneration, and what does regenerative leadership mean to you? Like, how do you explain this to people who are still in their programs?
Sure. I mean, the simple way is that being regenerative is just getting back in tune with life, how life works, how nature works. And the real gap of the challenges that we face today are because of that gap between how nature works and how we are currently thinking. Now, obviously, I've written a number of books about it, so there's more to it, but essentially we've gone on this sort of falling out of tune with life, and now we're finding our way back in tune with life. And that also happens personally in our lives, if we so choose. We allow ourselves to become more conscious and open up to who we are and tune into how life is. but it's also a process that's happening in society and wider civilization. So, it's a case of working with consciousness. So there's all sorts of models I've helped. So the busy business mind kind of gets its head around how to do that.
Yeah, I can relate to that also because my journey was also my first insight came. I was in a course on Singularity University in 2011, and I was already working in technology since 95, internet and mobile, socials and all that. And so the next step was exponential technologies. I was there very early on. But then when I was there, I was overwhelmed with the speed and the intelligence of the people that were basically in these courses. It was with a lot of people from NASA, Google, and all that. And my heart for the first time started aching, but I couldn't place it yet. It took me a couple of more months and then later on years to actually really integrate that feeling. Because you talk about instinct and intuition. I have also always done my whole life, worked on instinct and intuition. I see things that perhaps others don't see that fast, but then I see the bridges and I see the vision, and then you just work towards it. But then only later on, I realized actually that when I was working from intuition, it was just intuition from the mind. I didn't have any connection to my body. That only came later, when I was then more in somatic energy, also with indigenous wisdom, plant-based medicine and all that, that I actually realized, all right, we need to be attuned with the body. So how do you integrate this attunement with the body, the heart, the mind, the soul in your work for leaders? Because these are not easy concepts to explain to leaders that are working in business traditionally.
Yes. Well, there's sort of two questions there. One is around how to do that, and the other is how to bridge it so business leaders find it acceptable. In terms of how to do that, we are surrounded, but we are living in an experience full of love and full of tensions and full of twists and alignments that we can learn to work with. The body mind is full of these subtle yin yang energies that we can learn to work with and alchemize. For the busy business mind, what I tend to use is I work with, say, adult developmental psychology as a tool to help the business mind understand it. So I would have maps out, for instance, I bring people to the woods, senior leadership teams, and we're in the woods. I set out a carousel with different, the levels yourself. You've got the opportunist, red, you've got the amber diplomat, you've got the orange expert, the orange achiever, and then you've got the green pluralist, and then you're into teal and turquoise and so forth. And that's quite a profound shift from that orange green into teal turquoise. Let's call that the shift from achiever to regenerator, or from coping and struggling amid complexity, because you're worried about change, you're worried about insecurity, you're a separate self struggling to survive in a dangerous world, to actually going across a threshold and realizing you are immersed in, you are self as participatory, and that you have the capacity to open up to infinite potential as and when you wish, and that change and uncertainty is the vibrancy to life. And so you then start to thrive amid complexity, using terms like from coping amid complexity to thriving amid complexity, or from struggling against change to becoming future fit, resonates with the orange achiever mind of the leader, because the orange achiever mind wants to succeed. So you work with the desire to succeed, but what you're actually doing is starting to morph even what success is. And what we're actually doing is opening ourselves up to the depths of the inner and the outer realms of life and connecting into that through our body mind. And then the body mind becomes the most powerful vessel, instrument that we have available to us for opening into this alignment of mind and matter, masculine and feminine, inner, outer. So I use models like adult developmental psychology because some of the tools I use have been researched with thousands and thousands of leaders. You can show empirical evidence. What does it mean to be in teal, for instance, that strategist level? How do you deal with complexity? How do you see the organization as a living system rather than as a machine? How can you attract and retain higher quality talent as a result? How can you actually have value propositions that stand the test of time, that aren't fickle, that don't just need loads of Google ads? All of this, and you start building a bit of a business case for helping that leader wish to go through that.
That's fascinating how you integrated spiral dynamics into your work. What have you found is the role of nature in facilitating this change in leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most fundamental aspect of all of my work has been from these earlier experiences and still today is the recognition that when we are open and connected to nature, which is a totally human birthright experience we all have, we are starting to flow with that regenerative potential. We are starting to be in that right level of consciousness. And so taking people out into nature or coaching people online, but helping them connect to their inner nature and outer nature, because I think it's important to realize nature is not just out there. You know, the very cells in our body, the very consciousness running through our veins is part of nature. That sense of connection to inner outer nature is vital, really, is the ground from this. Breath work, biohacks, plant medicine, whatever it is, sit on top of that foundation. Without that foundation, those things become short-lived. They can almost become fixes, you know, sort of highs that we need to attain. Whereas if you have that ground of that deep sense of connection to yourself, to humanity, to the living earth, to the cosmos, then you are in that place of groundedness. And then engaging in something like plant medicine becomes part of that spiritual undertaking. That said, there is a lot of good evidence that says something like plant medicine actually helps you go through the shift to find more connection. I'm not saying that that's not the case. It is the case. And these are lots of tools that help us go through this membrane. I suppose what I'm saying is the foundation of the membrane is connecting back into nature.
Yeah, exactly. I experienced that myself as well. And I think integration processes are one of the most important things that we need to learn, right? So because we get all these messages and then we go into these integration processes that needs to be like daily practice, you know, like you need to get into a daily practice. And it's also about belief systems. How do you change your belief systems over time? Because most people are not aware of the belief systems they are in. So how do you actually make people aware of belief system change, and how do you also, or what are the practices that you bring into your learning practices, like day-to-day practices, you know, for everyone?
Yeah, well, I always test out all the practices that I work with my coaching clients with on myself first. So they're practices that I've been doing myself for a number of years and that I've seen work for others as well. A lot of my work is one-to-one as well as leadership groups. I coach either CEOs or senior people in different parts of organizations. And very much this is working with the whole self. You know, it may start as a sort of how do we upstretch our leadership development, but essentially, as you know, this is how do we upstretch our way of being. I think the fundamental framing is this connecting to your deeper nature, to life, to inner outer nature. So that comes with a deepening of self-awareness and systemic awareness. In reality, what do I mean by that? Self-awareness sort of starting to unpack, as you say, some of those unconscious biases, some of these blind spots that sometimes we can't even see, starting to get a handle on how I'm behaving, what happens, what triggers me, why. Noticing is the simple tool for that. Notice, notice, notice. I try and make it really easy for guys. Don't have to try and fix stuff. Just notice, because even the act of noticing when you've been triggered, what's going on, is already bringing self-awareness and consciousness to it, which makes the act of then releasing or processing that much easier, rather than if we go into self-judgment, which is already, we're still in that self as separate energy. So anything that just helps us come out to notice the dance floor, but also be on the balcony of the dance floor. The analogy I use is 3 stages of the river flow. You're either on the banks of the river, getting caught up to all of the cacophony each side of the banks of the river and all the noise and excitement of everyday life, or you're flowing with the river and you've got that sense of flow and intention and attention, which is that self and systemic awareness. Or you're building the condor view, which is recognizing that the stream goes into the river, which goes into the estuary, which goes into the ocean, which is actually all of life. And that we're not just in a swimming pool with armbands on learning to swim, we're actually in an immense ocean of interbeing. Now, that can be scary as you know, so it's a case of opening that up. But often going into fears is an important part of this. So even just attending, bringing our awareness, noticing. So if you were working with somatic awareness, for instance, like you mentioned, just bringing awareness to that ache or that dull pain or that whatever that issue is, just notice it. Don't judge it. Just be with it. So just the act of noticing is one tool straight off that costs nothing, which actually is life-changing.
You know, the philosopher Rumi has one of my favorite quotes is that yesterday I was young and clever and I wanted to change the world. today I'm older and wiser. I just need to change myself. So how do you see this relationship between inner work and shifting the collective narrative? And also, how do you stay aligned when the world around you seems misaligned?
I think it's important to recognize that what this meta crisis, I mean, people call it a polycrisis or perma crisis. I've been calling it a meta crisis, which is a moving beyond, that actually this crisis of crises we're in is actually an invitation for us to move beyond, because we simply can't deal with this level of volatility and interconnected challenges with the level of consciousness that created it. It's just not going to happen. And I think more and more leaders now recognize that. I mean, 10 years ago, more and more people kind of sitting up and listening. Now I think everybody just gets the fact that things are getting more volatile. What's important is, okay, we are dealing now with immense complexity. We have this gift, which is ourselves and our self-awareness. Often what we're doing by looking for solutions out there is disempowering ourselves. And that creates all sorts of anxiety and disconnection inside ourselves. And we actually then lose our connection even more. So finding that connection, cultivating that connection through the practices that Rudy was talking about every day, we can make these fun and enjoyable and really an interesting part of life. They don't have to be this sort of laborious self-flagellation or anything like that. It can be fun and enjoyable and help make us more enthusiastic and enjoy life. These practices constantly, like for instance, a very simple one, I often tell people who are on back-to-back calls, simply bringing up the glass of water and drinking is an opportunity to be fully present, to actually connect. And then we have slightly more detailed or esoteric practices for enhancing that energy flow through the body-mind, opening ourselves up to whatever you wish to call it, earth, heaven, energy fields. Then you are more alive, you're more aware, and you start to notice subtle energy shifts in conversations and so forth. The conversation or the noise or the disruption or the tension or the challenge that we've now had to change our budget because of Trump's tariffs or whatever the challenge is that you're dealing with actually becomes an opportunity to observe and notice myself, the system, how's the system changing, what's going on. So then that's that kind of holy curiosity that Einstein uses as a phrase, which I love. I would call soul curiosity or soul consciousness. You're observing, you're there, you're fully present, you're having the glass of water, but you're also observing yourself having the glass of water. And that quality grounds us, connects us, opens us up to the soul, head, heart, as you know, the three main neurological centers, head, heart, gut, start to align. Within moments, we can gain that coherence. We can, if we had electrodes over our body mind, we start to allow ourselves to open up to what I call activating our supernature. So I've got all these different sort of tools. None of them are particularly, I would say, earth-shattering. They're all very simple but powerful that work. And one of the first things I do right up front when people come here as a leadership group is actually explain to them about flow, the optimal human experience. Because leaders, the achiever mind, flow, and explain how it's all well and good having flow when you're on a holiday in the beach or in a sweat lodge or whatever you're doing or out in nature. But the other is in the midst of it all, and you've been in the boardroom for 7 hours and you're frustrated and you're tense. And how do you emulate flow in those situations? So that gets the interest, but actually it then quite soon dawns on these people that actually it is an embodied experience they can feel. So when I had a leadership team here last week, these are each of them, the general managers, running about a couple of billion each in their business. So pressured individuals, hundreds of emails every day. They arrived here. I could see completely. Some of them couldn't even look at me in the eye. They were so distracted and in their corporatized self. When they leave the woods 5-6 hours later, they're human again. And we specifically don't have the mobile phones with us, which is always a challenge for people. And I say, no, I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. You're leaving your mobile phone, and you have to be quite firm with people. And then it's usually the ones that are the biggest struggle come back at the end of the day and they pick up their phone and they go, oh my God, wow, I'm addicted to this thing, aren't I? What's going on? And then it dawns on them, oh dear, I'm looking at that while I'm talking to my children when I get home at night. We're caught up in distraction. By gaining that presence, by noticing our own presence, we start to notice the distraction. And then we start to buy in to our own journey.
Yeah, that's also my experience when you go with people in the woods, like somebody's mentioned recently on a retreat I was doing, and he said, like, in nature, that I don't have any bad thoughts. There is no stressful thoughts in nature. And I'm like, yeah, just because nature is, and we are just natural in nature. The stressing thoughts, I think, and all the negative thoughts and the polarizing thoughts are, I think, also a lot accelerated to the use of algorithms and the way they are coded, because we are in a world view or in a world system that has been coded to extract basically from the system. And then how do you see actually also on a systemic level and the future of leadership? Because we have, I think, a deep lack of really good leadership at the moment. And I think you and us, and we can see in our communities, there's lots of people that are actually working with the principles of regenerative leadership to actually prepare for the next paradigm shift. I think that is already busy being born. But how do you see, what's your vision on like the future of leadership, and how is that going to emerge also on a systemic level, economic level, and all that?
Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that with living systems and complex living systems, like, for instance, human civilization at the moment, we've got to realize that things go through patterns and rhythms and harmonics, and that actually things often get worse before they get better. And we have to reach that kind of nadir point. And so bring it on. Bring on the more utterly ludicrous activities that we see going on, because that's all helping. All sorts of things are happening. Even COVID had as an experience with the pandemic, had an effect on people. The banking crisis before that, all these sort of shocks that we've been having are all helping people see things or listen to different things and not accept what they're being told, and being open to the fact that maybe, just maybe, perhaps the news is just a form of propaganda. And that all of that is helping us open our minds to actually start trusting ourselves a bit more. And that even communities, I used to teach a lot of really intentional world leading communities when I was, 10, 15 years ago, when I was making that move out of corporate life into the work I do now. And a lot of these places, I suppose, I saw as, I thought were the answer for me. And I quite quickly realized in time, once you get to know these places after a while, that actually a lot of these communities have quite dark shadows, because sometimes these communities don't value authentic individuality. Any community, developmental, living system that wishes to become conscious, to regenerate, a shift, has to be a true community, has to honor true individuality, to allow people to go on their own different, unique developmental journeys, to bake in that kind of level of learning and development, curiosity, and to work with tensions. That's probably one of the most important things I've learned from nature, as well as the seasonality and the flows and the panarchy of nature, is this tension of divergence and convergence that creates emergence. And you find that tension everywhere, opening up, bringing together, in breath, out breath, expansion, contraction, high tide, low tide, the different anabolic, catabolic, all these different dimensions and twists and turns that together work and create something, the alchemy. Out of the duality comes the third, and the creative act. And that ability to work with tensions in communities, whether it be an organizational system or whether it be society, is what we're now having to experience, because there's more tensions. And as you say, there's sort of patterns out there that are actually encouraging polarities, encouraging dissonance, encouraging these sort of, but even that has an alchemic heat that's going to allow the Negrido phase, if you like, to go into another phase. So there's always something that life will work through.
I love this. The third creative act is a very, let's say, meta-modern concept. We have modernism and then postmodernism. And then after that is metamodernism, which is kind of the third way. Postmodernism is we kind of get cynical with modernism. The grand narratives don't really work. What happened to the American dream? Nothing's really working out the way I thought it would. And then after that, you can either regress back into modernism or pre-modernism, or you can move forward into metamodernism and this third creative act in life. Jung said holding the tension of the opposites and finding your way in between. And I like this achiever to regenerator shift. And you talked about the corporatized self. And I'm so familiar with that from my own corporate background. And you're in your analytical mind there's anxiety, there's pressure, there's these objectives and deadlines. How do you move from that into flow, into the intuitive? How do you make space for that in the corporate world? How do we embody back again? I call that kind of the erotic engagement with life, with reality. It's like it's
That
there and like let's seduce life again. Let's get into this relationship.
I'm not going to let that one go. I'm going to pick on that one before answering your first question because there's something nice in that. I got into the ancient Greeks a while ago because I found myself critiquing the West. And so I thought, well, hang on a minute, am I just doing your postmodernist bit? And what's actually in? And then I actually found, to my surprise at the time, that actually, whoa, hang on a minute, these early pre-Socratic philosophers had a deep animistic understanding. They were healers and shamans that have been misunderstood and misrepresented over time to fit our now understanding. And so, this sort of deep understanding, what I found was the ancient Greeks would play with these different qualities of love, and they had different names for them, as you know, agapeia, philia being the three main ones. And out of those three, back to our 3 in 1 Trinity and unity energy we're building here, when you have eros, when you have an erotic desire that is ungrounded, when you're in the ego detached, anxious or lusting, and you don't have that sense of connection that we've been talking about, you're no longer in that agape, you're no longer in that field of love, which is inherent within life. Call it the sacred feminine, call it whatever you wish. It's here, it's in life, it's imbued within this living Gaia. And when we're not connected into that, that eros becomes lusting or becomes anxious. And that's why it drives the consumeristic model, because you've got these insatiable desires that are never quite met, and so you buy the next thing and onto the next thing and so forth. But when you are connected in through what we're talking about here, then that eros is a love of life. It's a flowing, it's a creative act. So out of the one comes the two. And from that duality of the masculine, feminine, the excitement, the energy that comes from those tensions, you then allow the third, which is that philia, which is that love, that relationality, that engagement with the other, with life, with each other in that authentic community. And so from that agape, eros, philia, we then have this deep love of just being in life, which really is what regenerative leadership is. That's why all of my books are finished on love, actually, because underneath it all, it is an act of love, but not a Hollywood kind of love. We're talking about a deep sense of connection to ourselves and each other. And you mentioned Carl Jung, and I'll try and bring this back now to, well, the first part of your question, if I can remember what it is, which is that the unconscious, Jung's fascinating. I mean, there's lots to Jung, but this field of unconscious and conscious, making the unconscious conscious, or bringing the light of our conscious to the darkness of the unconscious, again, is another healthy tension, isn't it? Because it's not like we suddenly find the unconscious and we bring a light into it and we understand what the basement's like, because it's endless. He called it a plemora, but the field, whatever you call it, there's lots to it. But there's archetypal energies, which of course people like Plato have been misunderstood. But actually, when you read their original work, it's going back into this animist idea of things informing form, like we now find with quantum complexity. So to bring it back now to the organization, work with science. We've been scientized. We're in this sort of positivist scientism at the moment, where anything that feels like it doesn't fit within that rationalistic, reductive science is called pseudoscience, or it's called sort of waste of time or poo-pooed. And so work with that, even though it's very limited and is only a certain view of reality. And we have over the last 100 years had brilliant Nobel laureates time after time, quantum complexity theorists like Eli Progi, physicists like Albert Einstein, Erwin Schrödinger, David Bohm, brilliant minds, all exploring this immensity. And then you have depth psychologists like Carl Jung, Maria von Franz, and many others, exploring how working with this depth, with this field, with this consciousness, allows us to work with tensions, allows us to flow with life, which is, of course, what the ancients knew, and then we become future fit. So you're inviting the leader into a spiritual journey without them necessarily needing to think about a spiritual journey or what that even means, but inviting them into wanting to be more in flow with this experience, because otherwise they simply can't cope, let alone thrive, with the level of complexity going on. We're actually allowing ourselves to not know, back to our holy curiosity, to actually just be fully present and not know what might happen next. Now, for the leader that has become conditioned in the hyperachiever and a certain model, planning, understanding what the share price is going to be like in 3 months' time, what the scenario plans are, that's difficult. Now, what I'm not saying here is let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a transcend and include. We still have the models of modeling the P&L, scenario planning, backcasting. We need all that. That's great. But that is not dominating the show and crowding out everything. And this is the problem with more and more tech solutions, is it's kind of taking us into just that side of things rather than recognizing that we can open up to at least another half of life, if not more, which is the unknown, and allowing our presence to be open to the infinite field of possibilities where real innovation and creativity pours in.
I want to go a bit also on the masculine feminine balance that you also use in your work, because I think it's very important also to what we see in the world today, and what technology is accelerating is actually a huge shadow that we haven't been dealing with for a long time. They have this huge collective trauma that is now everybody's throwing their trauma on the internet, and that's basically augmented by the algorithms who love this, polarizing thoughts and all that, which is basically the wounded feminine and wounded masculine, or immature wounded masculine and feminine, it doesn't matter what we call it. But how do you integrate also, or how do you, because I see a lot of people are actually suffering. Yeah,
Yes.
they're in the suffering mode because they have not, managed to go through that trauma, or managed to find a balance between these masculine and feminine healthy energies. And so also out of Hinduism, the masculine and the feminine, the Shiva and the Shakti, they come out of very old traditions, like it's really indigenous wisdom as well. And so these are concepts that we don't really know here. And every time I talk about that with people here in the West, they don't really know masculine, feminine energy. What are you coming up with, So how do you see that?
Yeah, well, you can go very deep on this. So I'll come back to the leadership bit, because I wouldn't necessarily share what I'm going to share now with a leader I'm coaching in the first instance anyway, maybe later on in the journey. But when you really go into this is why I find the yin yang symbol, because it's also got the seed of the other in the each, and the circle itself is in the yin. So it's held within the field of the one, the yin, let's call it the sacred feminine. Out of that sacred feminine comes this tension of yin yang. So birth out of that one, that field, becomes this yin yang energy. And we're then working with that duality all the time in everything. And so back to our body mind, the caduceus symbol, for instance, which actually is used for health and regeneration. You see it on ambulances and so forth. The double snake going up the pole is basically a representation of the aligning of those energies. And this speaks to working with tensions again. That's the tension, a primary tension. We could either call it masculine, feminine, or yin yang, or whatever. You find it everywhere. The problem which you're identifying, which is this idea that because of society, I call it mechanistic materialism, the focus on the outer, the focus on the masculine, the focus on half sort of almost diminishing and suppressing part of that tension and overemphasizing on the other, it creates all sorts of imbalances inside ourselves. The upshot of which is that even that other side of the tension doesn't become mature, because you need both. The seed is in each. So you end up, as you've rightly said, with this immature masculine and feminine struggling around, where it almost feels like, what is the job now for women, just to become like men? I mean, come on. And so what actually is a true, how should a woman be becoming, fully in her power? How should a man becoming fully in their power? How can we talk about authenticity? That's the kind of space we want, rather than a kind of measuring of how many of what type or other we have. We're getting caught on the mechanistics of it, which I appreciate is a useful starting point. But that orange, green, teal, if you like, we kind of get a bit stuck in the green bit. And then we get stuck on the shadow of green, which is quite a big shadow, because it's easier to almost get caught in the shadow rather than go through that significant membrane. Or to use Alex's language, we get caught in that modernist critiquing, having a go, and we retrograde down rather than move up, because it's easier to have a go. It's easier to point the finger, to throw the mud, rather than work on yourself. So true communities that allow that level of authenticity of us working on our authentic masculine and feminine, which is essentially an integration of oneself first and foremost, before you can start to integrate those relationships with others. one of the people I was coaching just this morning, lovely, wise lady who runs actually a set of clinics and healing practices. We were talking about and how through the journey we've been doing, her energy system's been increasing. She's now this sort of quite powerful channel, and how that's obviously attracting other people who feel that they want to get sexually involved. This idea that, do we have to, am I only complete by having a sexual partner? Can I engage in a sexual practice that actually helps enliven my conscious, like Tantra, without necessarily getting attached to someone else? Or can I actually engage in integration of masculine and feminine energies that is a sexual act inside oneself, with actually just engaging in nature, love, without actually having another human being? And that's what the true practice of Tantra represented back then. And you find this tantric shamanic aspect in quite a lot of the indigenous practices around the world. Certainly over in China, Taoism really has that tantric animist aspect. Egypt, for instance, some parts of Peru, you've got this quite interesting alchemy of understanding that the engagement, even in Neolithic Europe, the image I just got then was, do you remember the caves in France? They had these men with erect penises. Now, that wasn't everybody's having a little gangbang. It's the act of connecting with the universe, connecting with having this out-of-body experience, essentially, and knowing thyself involves sexual energy. Then we start becoming more aware of our true masculine and feminine energies. We can really fall back in love with life, talking about this agape, eros, and philia. If we just get stuck on the eros bit without being connected to that field, oh dear, we're going to get ourselves in lots of problems projecting on what should a woman be doing, what should a man be doing. It becomes very shouldn't, and about metrics and numbers and what type of label you fit.
In Hinduism, we have Advaita Vedanta, which is more of a path of renunciation. So you're getting to the void by removing. And in Kashmir Shaivism, it's more of a tantric path where everything is divine. Like everything you look at is a creation of divinity. And so you engage with it. And so these are
an act of love, even that, isn't it?
Yes.
That is a devotional act to see
absolutely.
that.
And so I see that myself in the indigenous practices I've participated in, the Vision Quest, and especially the Sundance, which is a very embodied type of practice. You are there for sure, very present in that moment. But since the meta crisis is complex, and it's incredible complexity, and some of these things have a mind of their own. These are egregores like climate change and plastics, and these, they move on their own. They're like beings that exist with us. And it's very, it's overwhelming for any single individual to deal with these enormous problems. But then when you look at the inner work, that can be complex as well. You start to look into Jung, and there's archetypes and anima and animus and all these things, and there's spiral dynamics and the different levels, and that has its own complexity. So looking at your latest book, how do you address this complexity and help leaders deal with the accelerating overwhelm?
Yeah. Well, first off, Leading by Nature isn't my latest book, but that's fine. It's a good book, and it's the name of my podcast. So it's a good starting place for people who don't necessarily want to go deeper. But my latest book is actually Keys for Future Fit, but leadership. But I think that back up a bit, which is what's overwhelming. Let's question that first. Inside, it becomes overwhelming to try and deal with all the things, going on outside ourselves and the inner journey. Yes, but what's creating that overwhelm? The need to fix, to solve, to get to the known, to find a destination. If we start to question that, because that's inherent in our belief system, which isn't actually how life is, what life is teaching us. Life is actually teaching us to enjoy the journey, not the destination, not to rush to the point. And never forget this story of the indigenous, I think it was someone in Peru, when one of the Spanish conquistadors said, oh, take me to this village here. And he went around trying to offer people money and no one would accept. But then this sort of shaman said, yeah, okay, I'll take you. And took him on this sort of path, and all the way the chap was trying to rush, and he was saying, no, we walk, we don't take the horse. And finally got to the mountain overlooking this place that the quester wanted to get to. And the shaman sat down and made camp. And the Spanish guy said, well, what are we waiting for now? Let's get there. And the shaman said, no, we now have to wait. We've been going so fast that we need to wait for our soul to catch up, so that when we arrive, we will be one. And, of course, for the other mind, this mind that we're all conditioned in, and certainly in the West, which is to just get there and then we'll sort it out. You just have to sort of get there. The overwhelm comes with the, oh my God, there's so many things to fix. How are we going to? But actually, if we realize that this is it, this is the devotional act, this meta crisis, everything that we've got in it. This is it now. We're here. We're on air, live and direct, engaging in life. And this is the opportunity to see our love affair and to explore the different aspects of it. Then this anxiety actually eases because the sense of connection is there. The anxiety comes from the sense of disconnection. And that's when we go into the eros uprooted from the agape and we get into the, oh shit, and I haven't got enough time. If I get a team of 10 people, we just work really hard, we'll get this solved. Now, the money system is, of course, an important part of this. I appreciate that scarcity and security feed off each other to create anxiety. And many of the leaders I deal with have funding, they have plans, they have investment plans they need to meet, and that can be challenging. Hence the importance of patient capital and different investment streams coming on stream. But essentially, this overwhelm, we need to check, because we've almost got ourselves, and I noticed this in our circles, we've almost convinced ourselves that that's just, of course, this is the moment we've been waiting for. Let's not sort of fall over when we get to the starting line and say, oh, it's just too overwhelming. Oh, let's just go back to shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic and fiddling around and just deal with, no, this is it. And yes, this challenge, but that challenge brings tension, and those tensions bring opportunity and opportunities to learn. Back to our noticing. We're going to constantly flicker. And if we can fall in love with the flickering, even if we can fall in love with our own uncomfortableness and our own sort of trying to get the tracksuit off and tripping over ourselves a little, if even that we can laugh at and embrace and realize it's part of it, then I feel the overwhelm can ease a little.
Wow. Yeah. I'm mindful of time also. I think we have 5 minutes left. And I want to also spend some time on your book, your latest book, Future Fit Leadership. But I had one more question on what is the role of community in individual and societal healing? Yeah, because we do a lot of work in communities. We sit in circles. And for me also, that's the most rewarding work, because you can literally see that people, we are connected, we belong, we connect again. We become humble again by listening to others' experiences and all that.
Important, as long as you have that, as I said before, a true community that engenders, that cultivates authentic individuality and doesn't start creating that green shadow, that sort of herd group think, that sort of, I need to find my tribe so I can be whole vibe. But in reality, the circle that you talked about is, again, just a simple tool, but powerful. Sitting in circle with a talking stick, speaking from the heart, connecting, being fully present, fully hearing, noticing when you're judging, noticing when you're getting distracted, and being fully in that circle, circles of trust, we used to call them, or soul work, soul circles. And I found that always works. I do that with leaders. I do that with communities that come here to the woods. You can do it online. I ran a session for an international group last week where we had a very powerful online session. The trick again is having that intentional attentiveness to be fully present. So the short answer, because I know time, is of course, but notice that before the threshold, we get this me versus we, and you hear it in language, the shift from me to we. Well, in reality, that's still at green, really. In reality, it's me and we, understanding our true individuality and true sense of community and how the two sit together in that alchemy.
Thank you, Giles. This has been fascinating for me. I'm so pleased to meet you. Is there anything we haven't asked you that you would like to say?
Not particularly, except that you have a book behind you with the title Genesis on. I think we're good. I've very much enjoyed this conversation. It's one of those conversations which we feel like we've only just started. I think we've touched on a lot. So I appreciate you holding this space for me.
Yeah, thank you, Giles. This has been an amazing hour. I feel really honored and I'm pleased to have had this conversation and time with you. I want to spend some time on your latest book, Future Fit Leadership. Can you just resume why people should buy the book? I know it's a bit of a compilation of a lot of things you have been writing before, but I also know that every time your books get better. So what can maybe just the essence of the book in a couple of words?
Yeah, sure. The keys for future fit leadership is about a set of keys that I unpack and disclose in the book that enable you, the leader or the practitioner or coach, to have these keys to unlock every time you get caught up in the prison, every time you get caught up in that anxiety, every time you get caught up in that sense of disconnection. There's these keys that we can draw upon. And it's got over 150 full color illustrations. The whole book is in full color. Just the glossary at the back of the book is a book in itself. It is a massive tome. It's been called the Bible. It's got a lot in there. And in many ways, it brings together my whole, that those 7 books is one harmonic now in that framing around regenerative leadership and that work. The next 7 are going to be on something quite different.
Oh, you got us all excited now on your next steps. So I know you also do some work and retreats that you run in England, in the UK. Can you say something about that? I think it's in September or?
Yeah, we do. We have one in the 8th and 9th of September, which is a 2-day overnighter where you're in the woods. You actually have a 14-hour solo. You choose your spot. But we have that community, that sense of authentic community where we sit around the fire, we process, we work together, have simple, organic, wholesome food around the fire. And we always get this fascinating group of people from different, we've actually already got a couple of people signed up from as far as Canada, America, France, Italy. So, quite an interesting, diverse group of people coming together in community. And everybody always leaves those sessions and says, I'm so honored we were in that particular group because I found my soul group. And I know, having ran these now for 15 years, it's the fact that when we get together and we're authentic together and we connect, we love each other as human beings and we can see each other for who we truly are.
Yeah, and I think that's a great conclusion also for, the podcast is like, how can get together in physical spaces. We can do it online as we do it here, but like, how can we also show the warmth of being human and connect to each other? So thank you, Giles, so much for your presence and all your wisdom. And we will include all the links to your work and also your website and all the other books in our descriptions below. So thank you so much.